I'd like to go into a little bit, first of all, about who Rex Bionics is, what we do, and why we do it. As you said, it's a very interesting product. It's a fantastic step forward for people with spinal cord injuries. We're very proud to be a part of the team. Rex Bionics has been around for, I think, around about 10 years now. It must be coming up on 11. It was founded by a couple of Scottish blokes, Richard and Robert, who both had direct experience with wheelchairs or injuries that may put a person in a wheelchair. Richard's mother was actually in a wheelchair initially, and that's what kicked part of this off. And Robbie was diagnosed with a disease that may see him in a wheelchair one day. Richard was, I think, almost disgusted at the way that some wheelchair users are treated. And I guess it's almost a subconscious thing for people to put out that treatment. That treatment of people in wheelchairs really drove Richard and Robert's focus to create something better. So they started up a very small company that was venture capital funded, and that's been running for, as I said, 10 years now, 7 years of active development. And they came up with an idea for the exoskeleton. Once that idea was, I guess, beyond the initial stages and we were starting to get some devices that were up and walking, we moved into initial sales, mostly low volume stuff within New Zealand and a few personal imports overseas. So for us at that time, FDA compliance regulated markets weren't really on the horizon. When those sales started to come in a little more regular, we started looking at regulated market. Obviously, we needed to be able to move into pushing this device out worldwide for all the users that are out there. And that required us to start looking at a little more process control and an ALM system. So getting back to the Rex itself, it was a very simple proposition. A wheelchair is a great device, and Rex is not a replacement for a wheelchair. It's a tool for people who are in chairs. But the proposition is simply you either don't walk or you can walk. One of the things that Richard always mentions is that a spinal cord injury is not a restriction. It's the environment that we live within. Most houses, most buildings are designed around someone who stands up. And in fact, the human body is designed to be standing up. The number of complications that arise from being permanently sat down are numerous. One of the big things is obviously blood flow. When you're standing up, your body's pumping blood around correctly. You're not getting sores. So the idea was to get people up, standing and walking and interacting with their environment the way everyone else does normally. Electric wheelchairs were, I guess, looked at early on, but again, if you look at an electric wheelchair, they are heavy. They're not something you can toss in the back of the car quickly, and you're still sitting. You're not standing face-to-face talking to people. And that's where the Rex personal walking aid comes from. It's hands-free, self-supporting, and it is the only one in the world that does so. It allows a user to simply wheel themselves over to the device, transfer in, strap in, stand up, and walk. And that sounds very simple, and with the Rex, it almost is exactly that simple. As I said before, we're really proud to be part of this team doing this. The number of users around the world that could be using the device is well over 5 million worldwide. And our focus is on bringing this device worldwide and changing the lives of as many people as we can and helping out. Our current device, we've just managed to get a Class 1 certification, which means we're now able to sell into medical and rehab centers within the US, which is our first step. We see this as an opportunity to make a huge difference. In order to do that, we had to, as I said, look at ALM devices. And when we started looking at ALM products, we noticed there were some challenges we were going to have to overcome. The way that we were working was a little bit different. We have multiple departments that use different requirements for the same device. All of those departments are working in different manners. Software team's very agile. The mechanical team, due to machining times, etc., are very linear. So there was different styles of working that would have to be involved in the same product. Obviously, we had to meet medical regulations. All of our initial requirements, everything was done in Word and Excel, as they are done in many companies, but we had no tracking of what was going on. If a change was made to a Word document, we really had no way of telling who made the change unless they kept up with change notifications at the top of the document. And that's a very easy thing to miss. From there, we started looking at ALM tools and what we would need. Myself being a test lead, my initial focus was I need a test management system. And from there, it became, well, we also need requirements management. We need to track everything. It has to meet electronic signatures requirements for the FDA. As we learned more about what it meant to be in a regulated environment, we discovered, well, hang on, that also means risk management, customized reports to make sure that we're getting exactly the right information in a timely manner. The product had to be highly configurable due to the fact that our departments work in such a different way, but on the same products. And to be able to we had to be able to define within the product, within the ALM system, each individual product that we have that is made up of many subcomponents. And we have to have a way of tracking all of this together. Looking forward, as we get more and more product, as I said, we're currently selling into the US with our REX 2 device, and we're starting development in the REX 3. REX 3 is going to be much more complex, and we will have to tie in other systems, ERP, finances, etc. So the product that we chose would have to be expandable and must be able to communicate with other systems. We wanted not just simple access to a database, we wanted web services and APIs. After trialing, after looking at around about 15 to 20 different products, we got it down to 5 or so products that we trialed, including some of the ones from the very, very big players in the market. Eventually, we chose Polarian simply because the support and the configuration that was available within Polarian was so good. I can't count the number of times I've sent emails at all hours of our afternoon, which I know is all hours of the evening for Polarian, and we always got an answer back. I don't think David's eaten a meal with his family in a very long time because I seem to be interrupting him at about that time every day, I think. They were always keen to help us with customization. David and the team came up with some great ideas. They had templates that matched what we were already doing, and they knew about the medical regulations. We asked other ALM companies what they had in terms of medical compliance, and a lot of the time they didn't even understand the regulations that we were talking about. David and the team at Polarian, if I mentioned 62304 software development processes, they always came back with, oh yes, we understand that one. We have a template that matches it, or we can modify one to match it. So that was great, being able to have a system that was 9/10 of the way there, where we wanted to be. And the cost versus benefit, some of the systems we looked at would have bankrupted us with a single license, whereas Polarian, we've been able to roll it out across the entire company. So really, the competitors' products didn't match up to Polarian in terms of setup, compliance, complexity, or just being configurable enough to handle the complexity that we have within Rex Bionics. So I wanted to, show everyone a little bit about what we're doing within Polarian and some of the reasons that we chose it. Customized work streams by department. Now, that seems like a simple thing to have amongst most ALM products, but when looking into it, we found that most of them weren't customizable enough. We didn't want to have to change what we were doing to meet a tool. We wanted it the other way around, and we've been able to split out each of our departments into separate project teams and customize Polarian to suit exactly what they're doing. We've modified the current mechatronics template, which suited us well, but we wanted to be able to do, one step lower in terms of tasks. So that enabled us to be a little more agile within the FDA regulations. As you can see from the little screenshot off to the side here, we've not only got the standard requirements and tasks, enhancements, etc., but we've added in so that each issue can have its own tasks. We can have subtasks. Again, the same with enhancements. We split them down into individual tasks, which allows the software team to pick up individual small pieces and run with them as they need to. We're also rolling out Polarian across our mechanical departments. They had a paper-based engineering change request for every individual change. Polarian's now being used by them for their enhancements and their change requests, and very soon we hope to be able to roll that into the electronic drawings as well, and have absolutely everything tracked individually from within Polarian. Another big point, for me especially, I loved this, was the My Polarian home screen, which we can roll out across the company so that everyone has their own home screen. But we've also modified these for certain individuals. As you'll see here, my home screen is modified in such a way that I can see all of my linked work items that are linked to the tasks that I'm currently assigned to. I can see the severity, status, software projects, everything's there at a glance. So when I log in first thing in the morning, I immediately get a view of what's important to me. As you can see, the top one on the list is a critical item. and everyone gets a similar type of layout or a very customized layout if they need it, so that everybody, when they log in, the first piece of information they get is what is important to them. They don't have to troll through multiple screens to try and find what they need to be working on that day. And that's a big bonus. It makes it so much easier when you come in and first log in and say, right, what do I need to do today? Looking to the future with Polarian, one of the ideas we've discussed and they're currently working on is within our production area downstairs in the workshops, we want to be able to control and record all of our run-up tests so that we can look back on an item. If it fails in the future, we can see that we can look up the serial number, see what the test results were during the initial run-up of the device. And we can trace those test results and say, well, it was near the end, it was near the limits of its testing, and it broke down in the future. So we need to come back and take a look at those limits and maybe bring those in a little, control it from there. The customer service portal has just been rolled out as well. So we're now logging our customers within Polarian, all of their contacts and what devices are associated to that particular customer, which will then be able to immediately be able to see when a device fails or if a device is up on its hours and we need to bring that device in for servicing. We have all of that information all in the one system still, and we can report on that. As I think I touched on it before, the big thing about getting up and running quickly with Polarian was the fact that we were able to change Polarian to meet what we were doing. If we had to roll out new processes across the entire company, it would have taken us longer, and I think there would have been a lot more pushback from the teams having to use a new product. Whereas now we've made Polarian work for us, which is, I think, the way it should be with any tool. You shouldn't have to change the way you work to match a tool. The tool should match you, and that's what we've been able to do with Polarian. We just modified it to meet what everyone was already doing, and it becomes a much more natural part of your workday. So that's been great. So it's my little spiel on where we've come from and what we're doing with Polarian. I encourage you, if you're interested by the Rex Bionics story, take a look at our website and have a look at the little YouTube clip we have attached to the bottom here. Pop into YouTube, search for Sophie and Rex, and you'll get an idea of why we really love doing this job. Seeing a user walk for the first time is something very, very special. And it's great that Sophie's put that video up there for everyone to see. I don't think we would be in the position that we're in without having chosen Polarian and rolled that out across the company. It has been the tool that's allowed us to get this into a Class 1 situation where we can really start making a difference to a lot more lives around the world. In conclusion, I want to say a big thank you to David and the whole Polarian team. They've been a massive help, and especially in terms of being a small venture capital company. They've supported us with the trials for longer than what I think would have been fair, and they've allowed us to get to this point where we're now up and running. So thank you, David and team. You've helped us to make a huge difference around the world.
Well, on behalf of Polarian, you're welcome, and I can only say it's been a pleasure working with the whole Rex Bionics team as well, and I think in some ways we built a partnership. So we're going to transition for a moment away from talking about some of the higher level aspects of why you would select Polarian, and hopefully I'll be able to show you some specific demonstration topics that apply directly into some of the things that Toby's talked to us today. So I'm going to start to introduce a little bit of the Polarian interface and how we can begin by managing requirements. When I do, I'll think about things like making requirements not just static, not just artifacts, but really actionable and transparent information. And as Toby so well articulated, we want to go beyond mere requirements, not just to have one type, but many types, a multiplicity of Polarian work items that help us break the work down, whether you're building a bionic exoskeleton or manufacturing embedded software for medical devices or the full mechatronics scheme. I'll talk a little bit about how managing tests and how we can build test protocols within Polarian and then turn those protocols into test execution, perhaps the iterations of dry runs that you would do time and time again, preparing for that final test that would ultimately be part of your certifying body. And while I'm going to talk about it at last, it's probably better to begin with it at first, and that is the goal or the challenge that medical devices often have to envelop all product development with risk analysis. If you read carefully the ISO 14971 risk requirements, it's clear that that type of harm and hazard risk analysis needs to be applied from the very beginning of a product development cycle through all the development and testing and delivery and ultimate disposal of the product itself. So it's proper and appropriate then to have in Polarian risk analysis that spans all aspects of the product development cycle. And I'll also, if we have time, talk a little bit about using a more traditional engineering approach of DFMEA risk analysis. So with that, I'm going to transition away from a PowerPoint slide, and I'm going to introduce the Polarian interface. This particular Argo project is just an example of how companies like Rex Bionics can use Polarian to have all the different projects work together to produce a final product. In fact, this is a diagram that Rex and Polarian worked on together to understand how low-level components in sub-project areas can be created and reused into a much larger project space. So instead of having a single Polarian project acting by itself, we have many Polarian projects working together. And so in this Polarian interface, as we see on the left-hand side, which is the navigation window, if I open the navigation window up, I'll be able to see how I can hierarchically build the association of complex products within Polarian so that the full product has a particular space and individual hardware or software projects have their own embedded space within the project. So that was, I think, a very important message that we had when we first got started. So let me come back to the Argo project, and I'll point out another key thing that Toby brought out. And that's here what you see when you see my name and my Polarian page. I'm going to click on that and open up in the workspace my own. This is now David Merrill's version of what Toby had. You can see that it looks a little bit different. It's focusing on tasks and defects. It's showing me recent activity that's occurred within this particular project space. And for those of you who are interested in agile development, I can also track my user stories and spikes or individual tasks associated with sprints. I can see items waiting for approval. And then ultimately what I'm going to focus on is this last piece here at the end, potential change impact. Now this is pretty important right away because I come here perhaps first to find out what changes other people have made that impact my work. And so when Toby said, what do I have to do today? One of those things is respond to changes that other people did. So if I click, make this information now actionable, I can move away from the Argo project and open up a specific project that shows me a requirement that is affected by a previous change. And so right away in my first 5 minutes, I can find that particular requirement. I can look at the history of that requirement and find out that recently categories were added and a severity from should have went to a must have, and estimates were put in place, and a target version changed from version 2 to version 1. And so with all of these changes now, I can make sure I can go back to my particular requirement and respond to those changes. And in this way, all change is propagated throughout my particular Polarian project. You can see that I've moved a context away from the Argo project into a fictitious project inspired in large part by what Rex is doing, and that is, what would it take in Polarian to build a bionic arm? And so now I have a context of the bionic arm project. So let's open up and see what kind of work items are inside this particular mechatronics project. You can see that I have system requirements, which are familiar to many of us, but I also have software requirements, mechanical requirements, and electrical requirements. And inspired by adherence to a formal V model, each of these requirements have their own individual test cases, which by virtue of Polarian linking and traceability will ensure I can make the statement that mechanical test cases have specifically verify the mechanical requirements and electrical test cases to electrical requirements. And that will be something that becomes important later on when we look at traceability, as well as when we start executing the tests themselves. So you can see that I go beyond mere requirements by not just having one type, but many different types. Now, as I move through my projects and I change context here in the work area, I have what is also important for Rex is the ability to be able to change and match the different tasks and personas and groups that would participate in the bionic arm project to match their operational needs, not just following what a Polarian software designer thought should be the way to go. So now just about everything that you're about to see is configurable by you, project by project, or even globally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive right into a special requirement space. And now, instead of looking at one individual requirement that was affected by change to from another individual requirement, I'm going to take a larger spectrum of look at this. So one thing that I might see is that there are inputs, formal inputs into the requirements process. One might be a document that is the project plan. Possibly I would also have a risk management file, which I'll talk about in a moment. But then I have key outputs of this requirement process. And this is now going to introduce taking not just one requirement by itself, but a whole family of requirements and organizing them in what I'll call a Polarian document view. Now, when you see it, it looks very much like a regular Word document, but it's really anything but just that document. There's headings and unstructured text. And then as I move down through here, you might notice on the left-hand side that some icons have changed. I have this purple icon. That purple icon matches what we see here under the work items view, telling me that I'm looking at not just unstructured text in a document, but a very formally defined system requirement. And so I'm now viewing the content of the document. So instead of managing the document file, we're now starting to break it down and manage individual fields and attributes of this very living, breathing requirement within my system. So I can make changes directly here. One might be, I look at this particular diagram and I see that there's a patient and caregiver user in my use case illustration. So I'll dive right into this diagram and perhaps say what I really need to do is have independent views here so that I have not just patient and caregiver, but one is the patient and one is the caregiver. So again, perhaps not the most complicated diagram change, but in doing so, you get a feel for being able to step into the Polarian diagram editor and without having to go out to Visio or another modeling tool, be able to capture the changing attributes of a requirement while it's being built and elicited. One thing I might add here is the bionic arm should be cool. So perhaps not the greatest verifiable item here, but certainly something that could be validated. And I move through the document and I'll see other things, other extensions and details of different types of requirements. And so I'm going to go ahead and save this. When I save this change, I'm not just saving a file, I'm really saving only those items which I've changed individually to the document itself, to the contents. And so now I'll be able to look at not just the historical change of this whole document, but individual items. Now, one thing that's often important is the extension of just the fields that you see here to a much more robust set of data and attributes. So still in this document context, I'm going to open up what we'll call a tree view. And that's going to take us from a document-centric presentation of the data to a more tabular presentation of the data. So here I still see the same relationship between headings and indented requirements, but I actually can now view individual items and exactly how they trace to other lower level items, as well as the custom fields that I might set. So things like being able to change the workflow lifecycle or status, add or remove target revisions. And if I go down deeper beyond the description, you can see a lifecycle of comments, of approvals, and other linking items, including things like attaching files that are important to this work item, and hyperlinks. Now, I'm going to pause for just a moment because I saw a question come through. So let me take that question. So Dennis asks, can a document contain multiple requirement types, system requirements, mechanical, electrical? Very good question. The answer to that is absolutely yes. It is true that this particular document that I'm looking at has been configured to hold really just one type of requirement. But if I went back into the document view itself, I just need to come up to the top here to the document menu and configure this document to be able to contain any other Polarian work item. So you can see that it would be possible for me to have a document that contains actionable tasks and doesn't have anything to do with a requirement at all. In fact, when we talk about risk analysis, we'll look at a document which is a centrally defined harms document where the medical harms of a particular device are elicited and approved just like you would a requirement. Excellent question. So that way I can establish the traceability and view not just system requirements, but go deeper into all of the different engineering disciplines or design specifications directly in the document view. One of the things that I also like quite a bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this navigation window to give us a little bit more real estate on the page, but I'm going to come up here to a Polarian sidebar. And you can see here I have the ability to view document comments, but I'm going to open up this work item properties sidebar. And that now gives me the opportunity to see some of the more detailed attributes directly in this view. So while I'm editing this particular requirement, I could say something like, well, I know my colleague Jim Ferranti is going on vacation, so I'm going to remove him as an assignee, and maybe I'm going to put in my other good colleague, Tim Samper, and I'd like to just make that change while I'm looking at and viewing this document. And so I could save just that change or continue to do other things as well. I could show the comments and see specific document comments like, what do you mean by 50% mobility? Well, if I click on that comment, I'll move directly to this requirement that says, okay, version 1 has to have 50% mobility, and somebody has mentioned, what does that mean? We need more specific detail. And so my call to action would be to step in here and refine that particular meaning, which I can do directly from this screen. And so I could save it in the document, or I could have gone back to the table view and been able to change many of these items at one time. Now, one of the central facets to Polarian that's extremely important is that when I do something in Polarian, you will always know who makes a change, when that change was done, and then you'll be able to view the contents of that change. So if you look at this screen, you can quite literally see not just milestones or benchmarks of the document, but every time somebody clicked, in this case, I guess I've done a lot of work in here, every time I've saved the document, and if I want to be able to compare different revisions of the document, I can simply highlight the two and either see that comparison as a document view or as viewing specific work items, as we're seeing right here. So now I can see the difference between that work item as it was and as it is today. Let's go back to one of the earlier points that I brought out. After we've sort of worked with requirements, we want to bridge out into testing. And the important bridge there is maintaining elements of traceability. What I'm going to do now is, again, open up the product requirements document. We're going to look at one of the more recently defined requirements that I built in here, which is a database warehouse. And I can see by my traceability here in the view that I don't have any test cases for this particular requirement. So I could look at that and visualize it on the document, or I can also open up a system test specification where I'll be able to see similarly what would become a test protocol document. It might look a lot like what we see here in what we saw in the requirements view, but instead of containing test specification, or instead of containing requirements, it contains test specifications. So let me quickly put in a test for a very high-level validation test for something like the database. So I'll click on the test case icon, and now I'm ready to draft my test case in this item directly. And the test might be ARM database is. So I'll make this very simple. I could put in detailed test steps here, connect to the database, In the interest of time, I won't take it much further, but I'll save this specification. So if one group is developing specifications, test protocols, and another group is working on requirements, sometimes these work items exist in different areas, and at some point they get linked together. Well, in Polarian, anytime we see a work item, there's a link icon directly to the left. And so I can begin by creating the link between this test case, and I'm going to choose its role. Now, I want to choose a very strong verifies role in this case, and I can move from the test case in this document view to the product requirements area where I was viewing the ARM database. And you can see here that the linking wizard follows me. And I just need to click on the one or the many different types of requirements that will satisfy that particular link role. And it does remind me that because I'm editing in a document, I need to come back and save that. But watch what happens. So if I come back to this product requirements document and now open this one requirement individually, I'll be able to see immediately the tracing to that particular test. And if I needed to create another test, I can create it also directly from this interface. And as I individually build these tests, it's important to note that you can import tests from other systems. So if I had an Excel spreadsheet full of test cases that were in documents, I could import those documents directly. And if I had an external testing system, I can connect Polarian to that testing subsystem and import those tests data to data instead of having to create them one at a time. So it's really designed to meet your current operational needs. But this is really just a view from a single requirement to its necessary tests. What happens when we need to pull back? So I'm going to pull back and take a look at a more broad analysis of the traceability between requirements and tests in the Bionic Arm project. To do that, I'm going to open up development, and I'm going to view this special page called test coverage. And I can select by either requirement status, or I can pull back and look at all requirements and visualize very quickly all of the requirements that are developed in my system and all of the test cases which have been written for those requirements. So you can move down through this table and see quickly that I have a lot of work to do because I have a lot of my family of requirements that don't have validating or verifying test cases. And so here you can see under the one ARM 1681, the ARM database, I have the two test cases which I just drafted. A single test case can validate or verify more than one requirement, and a requirement can be validated by more than one test case. Let me check real quick into the question and answers. Christian asks, can documents be imported? They absolutely can. I think it's just a little bit outside the scope of time that I have today, but formal document imports can be done with Microsoft Word, with Excel, with Project, with XML and CSV level files as well. You asked also, can Visio documents be imported? Right now, we do not have an import from a Visio document into a Polarian diagram. However, a Visio document can be immediately usable as an attachment and a visualization within the artifact. So I could come and attach a Visio document and make it part of the life cycle of that particular requirement. So let me come here. I think I have a Visio document in here. I'm working on a Macintosh system, and yes, sure enough, here it is. So I can't open that right now on my Mac, but I could certainly attach the Visio. And if I decided to, I could cut and paste or insert images of that Visio document directly into the work item. And so what I'll do here is come into the image option to insert an image, and I could either paste from the clipboard, or I might browse to pick up a wireframe from a whiteboard conversation or any other collateral that goes into the things I need to do to develop this particular database. And then when I save that, I'm saving it not just here in the requirement, but I can immediately open up the document and visualize now that new requirement in all of its configuration directly in the document. So the transparency between editing a document, working in a document, and working in the table view becomes an important part of a Polarian user. Some of our users are not what I would call document-centric, in which case they focus mostly on the information that they would view here in the tracker views and the reports that they would generate, as we saw before, like being able to make sure that I have full coverage of all of my items. I'll use this as kind of a short conclusion so that we'll still have time for questions, but I want to move on and talk a little bit about how all of this works together with risk analysis. So Toby mentioned how important following some standards like ISO 14971 was to his company, and we certainly see that with our customers, that involving risk management as an integral part of your product development is very, very important. So now I'm into another special project here, which can either be folded into the Bionic Arm project, but this one is designed to work sort of across all projects. Much like what we had with requirements, I have inputs for my risk management plan strategy. I can import documents from industry or consultants that contain the type of medical hazards and harms I might work with. And I can follow the particular workflow, which is different for risk management than it is for requirements analysis. So each individual work item type can have its own dedicated workflow. One thing that we'll see inside this project also is it has its own special set of Polarian work items, and those Polarian work items work together to build what should be my harms and hazards analysis. So let me just give you a very brief overview of that. I can, again, open a harms definition document, and that document will be able to give me a presentation, not of requirements, not of test cases, but of the approved medical harms. In fact, I might have a doctor who I'm going to ask to come in and give formal approval to this harm. Now, granted, I am no doctor, but this is the process that person might follow, to come in and review how I have defined this particular harm, a torn rotator cuff for usage with my products, and I can approve that item. When I approve that item, I can move to the next and approve another, and perhaps I would disapprove and say something with a comment like, this is not appropriate here. And as now that stakeholder, as a doctor now, when I click Save, I'm presented with a CFR 21, an FDA CFR 21 Part 11 challenge for an electronic signature. So I must re-authenticate at this point. So you can configure Polarian to know which events of approval or workflow process change are important to your own electronic certification. And so as long as I'm the right person and I fill out all that right data, then I have not just saved the information about requirements, but I've saved approval data that is now electronically signed within Polarian. But that's still really not what I wanted to show you. I definitely want to come into things like harms, and one of the things that you'll probably realize with a harm is that if I open that harm, I want to be able to set the medical severity here. So this particular harm has a risk severity of 3 in my case. And you can see attached to it, linked, are some hazards. So if I go back to my risk management file, I ultimately want to be able to visualize my harms and my hazards coming together and being able to see the mitigating items. And I'll use this view as the completion or the conclusion of my part of the demonstration. Now I'm viewing a particular Polarian page where I have a breakdown of the medical harms and the hazards associated with my particular device, the Bionic Arm. And I have a pre-mitigation score, which takes the risk of the harm and the probability of occurrence of the hazard and puts them together into a formal RPL score. Now, in this presentation, the RPL of 1 is acceptable. The RPL of 2 is a certain level of possible mitigation, and the probability or the score of 3 is absolute mitigation. Now, we understand also that ISO 14971 Annex Z might make it very important not just to mitigate 2s and 3s, but every item. So here in this other column, we see an important part of how Polarian brings added value to the risk analysis, because now instead of having a disassociated section of text in a spreadsheet that talks about mitigating a requirement. The hazard itself is linked to the specific requirement that would mitigate that particular hazard. And that particular mitigation can come from something as simple as a system requirement, which we see here. So if I open that up, we will in fact be able to see that this particular system requirement in the bionic arm project is going to mitigate the hazard that has been assessed across all of my different product lines. And if I return back to this, I can make changes and see the completion values here of the different items. So in this page also on the right-hand side, once mitigation is complete, like you see here in this line, when the mitigating items, whether they're tests or process controls or process validation or design controls, once they've been fully mitigated, I'll be able to score a new value for the occurrence, the probability of occurrence of a particular hazard, and have a post-mitigation RPL, which ultimately can be used as part of my my value to the audit process within the FDA. So our goal is to take the static value of mitigating risk and bring it back into the project, back into work items, which themselves can be actionable and managed like you do all of the other items. So I've come already to the end of my presentation. What I'd like to do now is turn the time over to you and allow you to ask any question, preferably not even of me, but of Toby and also his colleague, Darcy Williams, who has joined us. So please use the chat to chat with me directly, or the question and answer dialogue to ask additional questions of Toby. And I'll come back to the PowerPoint here. And here, I guess it's not framed very well, but you'll be able to see our contact information. You're certainly welcome to contact me directly if you have any questions. But again, Toby, if I could, I'd like to ask you to sort of add your comments about the document import process.
As I mentioned in the Q&A to Christian, we found it very useful to be able to, while we were importing our Word documents, there is a feature within Polarian that can identify specific points as a requirement and sub-requirements. So depending on the formatting that you've got in your Word document, it's a simple case of selecting it to import and then tell it that everything that is a heading level 2 and contains a particular text like must, will have, etc., it will automatically turn those into requirements. It makes the import process very quick and very easy.
Very briefly, to back that up, what I've done is started to bring in a specification, a software specification for this ARM database that is my sample. And so I can just easily pick which work item type I think it's going to be. In this case, it's not a system requirement, but it's a software requirement. So it's a slightly different item. And instead of putting it in the requirement space, I can choose to put it into the design space where I would expect to see my different engineering disciplines. And with just a few of those things, I can click preview. And what will happen is Polarian is going to look for the occurrence of must or should. And first it'll convert all the headings. But whenever it finds that natural language in the text of my requirements, it will highlight, as you can see here, the requirements on the left. And so what Toby was saying is that this is very easy to extend from the very, very simple, as we have here just looking for words, to things like regular expressions and being able to open and alter the performance of this document and set specific fields like severity to have a particular value in the event that inside the paragraph I really do see the word must. So it can pull that word must and now set the appropriate severity value based on that. And so if I click on import now, it's going to take all that data right from that document and create a Polarian document with all of the work items contained inside there. So very easy to pull these documents in. And that's an important part of many new customers, to take the file-based documents that they have in Word or Excel and get them broken down into the content as quickly as possible. Yeah, Toby, you had one other question that came in on Skype. So this is a question on services. They're interested in the ratio of services to software. And does Rex maintain your system yourself, or do you use Polarian technicians? So that might be a good time to talk a little bit about the transition you did from that hosted trial we started out with, bringing the system in locally as you have now.
Initially, we were having some problems with our server, so we went with a trial system online within the Polarian cloud, which enabled us to get up and running very quickly. I think it was a matter of contacting you guys and saying, hey, we need to use this, and the next day we had a system there which we could start putting our data into and using. In terms of customization and what we're doing with the product, I've been furiously studying how to modify pages, etc. within Polarian. I say furiously studying because I'm not a developer. I don't have a lot of code knowledge, so it took me a little bit longer, I guess, to come up to speed on some of the nuances of how the pages are put together. But I've gotten to the point now where I can modify a lot of the reports, etc. myself. For any of the bigger customizations, I would work with David and his team to get everything up and running. We do have one customized report that I had to use the Polarian team for, simply because the complexity of what I wanted to do was beyond my knowledge. But so far, I don't think we've come across anything that can't be done. I'm not sure if that answers what you're looking for, but yeah, I mean, we started with the Polarian Online in the cloud. We've brought everything back in local now, transferred everything over to our own server. We do everything internally. It's all managed internally in terms of administration of users, who has access to the system, and how the system looks. That's all up to us. In terms of heavier customization, then we always go back to Polarian and say, hey guys, what's the best way to do this? Can you help us with it?
Well, one of the things that I could add in, thank you, Toby, that I'll add into this is, and Toby can attest, as much as I pleaded with him to require on-site Polarian services so that I could visit New Zealand, all of what you've seen Toby accomplish has been done remotely between occasional access of the Polarian team and his own work. And so we're able, from a services side, just as a services note, there are some Polarian services which are built around an initial rollout, or more like what's involved with Toby, a la carte based on-demand type of services. Largely, I would say Rex has been self-taught in the product, and they were able to move from the knowledge that they picked up in the evaluation, the space that they started with the evaluation, to bringing it internal, and have really changed the scope of their project beyond anything that I worked with them directly initially. So it is services are designed to match your need and your budget, to go back to the question. I think it'd probably be better if you were looking to talk to Toby directly about how much he spent in services, that you might want to contact him directly in his email. That might be a little bit more appropriate than answering online. Thanks for that question. Okay, there's also a question about is Polarian IEC 62304 certified? Generally speaking, we do have TUV certification, for formal certification that's been done for automotive customers, and that's very, very similar to the type of product level certification that you would need for IEC 62304. There are specific Polarian extensions which are designed specifically to deliver 62304 compliance. What I would add to that is, because of the customizable or configurable attributes of Polarian, it's often the intended use that you have at the end of your product configuration, which is more relevant to compliance and certification than Polarian as a whole. So to that end, often customers will wait until they have customized the product to match their particular needs, and then that is the result that they take internally or within their own consultants to achieve that kind of certification. But the same test cases that you see written for product development can also be drafted for following the compliance process of Polarian itself. Excellent question. I hope I answered that to your satisfaction. If you would like to have a deeper dialogue into that, again, please feel free to call us or contact us on Polarian.com. Okay, well, oh yeah, Toby, please.
I was just going to say, I think also with the 62304 processes, they are also very dependent on how, or what level of complexity your product is at. There are different levels of 62304 certification. So depending on where you're at, that will make a difference as to what you need to do to modify either the Polarian setup or your own setup to match.
And one of the things that I would probably add to that is, and I spoke to it briefly, but it certainly merits a deeper discussion in that every single Polarian work item type, the system requirements, the test cases, is supported by its own dedicated workflow process. And that workflow process can be as rudimentary as just simply static values as it moves through the development process, but it also can be very tightly interwoven with the other operations of work item types within that project or within other projects. I often refer to this as the release easy button. So would it be possible for the Rex Bionics CEO to have a button in Polarian that he can press to say it's okay to send Rex 3 into wide manufacturer? It is possible because behind the scenes, that can be supported with very detailed prerequisite processes that follow that entire release cycle. So a requirement cannot be released unless it has been appropriately broken down into its engineering discipline components. And each of those components, the software requirement has a software test case. That software test case has been executed in the last 7 days. And the result of that execution has been successful. So it would be possible on an atomic level to look at that and also roll all of that data up to a central decision, a central reporting aspect in Polarian to ensure that all requirements have been approved, all tests have been executed, and it's okay to release that product into production. Now, that's perhaps a very simple example of what could be a very complicated process. And to Toby's point, oftentimes companies aren't ready for something like that, or they have no desire for that type of enforcement. So you'll be able to design your project around that level of process enforcement that you need to assert. Okay, well, we're definitely coming to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank Toby Martin and Darcy Williams for joining us, very much so, on their Friday in New Zealand. I would encourage you to visit Polarian.com, where you can start with an online trial of the tool. If you're interested in having a deeper dialogue with Toby or myself, you can reach out and we will be able to even arrange one-on-one demonstrations for you, similar to what Rex had when they first got started. So again, thank you for joining us, and also thank you to Nancy for facilitating this call. But we'll go ahead and conclude our recording today, and wish you a good day.